Well, thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Phil Daubenspeck, and I'm the Executive Director at West Sound Youth for Christ. And we are hosting a series of webinars all about parenting kids through COVID-19. And tonight we are going to talk a little bit about health, fitness, and nutrition with special guest, Coach Cody Smith. So wanted to just take a minute to let you all know about West Sound Youth for Christ, the organization that's putting this on. We work with young people across Kitsap and North Mason, providing after-school programs, programs to help pregnant and parenting teen moms and dads and kids in the Juvenile Detention Center. So we are pretty active right now trying to meet kids' needs wherever they're at as they're walking through this COVID-19 crisis, and appreciate your support in that. One of those ways we're helping folks is with these webinars. And so I'm very thankful to have a couple of friends of mine on here tonight, Julianne Colbrand and Cody Smith. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves very quickly, and then we'll get started. So Julianne, why don't you go first and introduce yourself?
Awesome. Well, good evening. I'm Julianne Colbrand, and I've been with West Sound YFC for almost 5 years now. Grew up in the Bremerton, Central Kitsap area, graduated from Glahowie, and I'm currently serving as the City Life Center Director for our teen center in Bremerton, so where I live.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then my other friend on here is Coach Cody Smith. Cody, can you introduce yourself to us?
Hey everybody, I am Cody Smith. I am a husband, a dad of 3 crazy boys. I own both Virtuous Fitness here in Silverdale, Washington, and Pacific Northwest Jiu-Jitsu. I have known Phil and Julianne here for several years, and I have the privilege to coach them both in their fitness and health. And I have been very familiar with YFC here I've been to the past 2 years of auctions and love the organization. And I'm just excited to be here and to be able to just share some of my expertise with everybody.
Great. Well, again, this is just all for parents of kids. And so if you are watching this and you want to invite somebody to watch with you, go ahead and invite them in. They can watch on Facebook, or it's not too late for them to jump on this webinar as well. You can also find more information about all the webinars that we've had. We've done a bunch of them so far, and they're all available online at westsoundyfc.org/parent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But right now, I'm going to turn it over to Cody, and Cody, take it away.
All right. So thank you guys so much for attending the webinar today. So Phil actually approached me with this, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, and asked me if I would be interested in coming on and talking to you guys about some of these things. I know for a lot of people, the whole training and fitness and health industry can be very confusing. There's tons of information out there. It's hard to tell what is good information, what is bad. And then when it comes to, our youth, it's hard to really determine like what should they be doing and what should they not be doing, especially when a lot of the literature and a lot of the information out there on it is not exactly clear when it comes to kids, because you got some camps that say things are good and some that say things are bad. So I'm going to try to uncover some of that and share some of the strategies that I have used in training both my own children and making health a priority in our family, as well as the youth that I've had a privilege to work with. So as we breeze through this, if you're watching this in the future, you're not going to be able to ask questions actively, but if you're going to be catching this live or going to jump on the webinar, be sure to drop your questions inside of the question box or in the comment box, and we'll stop and kind of unpack some of it. But other than that, I'll just roll through it here and fill you guys in kind of on what we're going to be doing. All right. So in the class today, we're going to essentially talk about how many times I've messed up, right? And that's always something interesting that I want to share with people first, because I think it's very much a very sad enough. It's not truthful that us coaches have it all figured out all the time. We all have our own stories. We have things that we messed up on. And like a lot of people, we spend a lot of time figuring up, and we turn our mess into our message. So today I'm going to share with you guys who I am, some of my mess ups, and then principles that I use both in my own personal life and have ever since I was a child, all the way up to now passing that gospel of fitness on to my own children. So I'm going to talk to you about the 4-headed monster approach. I literally just made that up today as I was coming up with the framework of this. I thought it would be something cool to kind of stick in your head. So if you're already saying four-headed monster in your head, then it has done its very job that I planned it to. So we're going to talk about training. So fitness, exercising, whatever you guys want to call it. For me, I just call it training, and it kind of all encompasses everything. We're going to talk about fuel. Fuel is your nutrition, the way that you nourish and feed your body. We're going to talk about recovery, and then belief. That should be an F, not a V, but it is what it is. I'm a trainer, not an English major. So don't judge me on that, you guys. And then we're going to learn how to glue all of this craziness together and deliver something amazing to your kids. Sorry, guys, I'm new here. All right. So how I figured this out. So the Loch Ness Monster and how I changed. Let me unpack that a little bit for you guys. So if you rewind, I am 33 years old, I believe. If you rewind 20, 22 years ago, I was an overweight kid. I was one that lived and breathed off of Little Debbie snack cakes. So I'm talking the oatmeal cookies, the fudge rounds, the brownies with the nuts, and then when they made it later with the chocolate pieces in the top. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're salivating, then you're welcome. And what had happened was I ballooned up and gained a lot of weight. The only exercise that I did consisted of me running up and down the street, chasing my buddies, and then playing baseball during the summer. But that was pretty much it. So like most kids, having no experience, no education, my parents were the same way. Both of them overweight, unhealthy by, several measurements. And this went on for a long time. Now, and I told a story to multiple people, and I actually shared this with Phil this morning. The Loch Ness Monster was a roller coaster at a amusement park back home in Virginia, where I'm from. And there's this very real story that has always stuck out to me in my head when I go back and think about like my childhood and some of my weight issues and my health issues. And there was this roller coaster in this amusement park called Busch Gardens in Virginia. This roller coaster was called the Loch Ness Monster. Now, I remember when my mom and dad walked me to the gift shop one day after we had just got off the roller coaster. You do the thing, you go look at your picture, how you're really scared when you go down. And we eventually made our way to the gift shop. They had this hat. And if you guys are watching this on video, the hat sat here and there was like this drape that went down the back. In the back, it was the Loch Ness Monster, like the graphic, and then the text that went with it. Now, that hat is significant because at the same time, I was obsessed with this karate show that used to come on Sunday mornings, every Sunday morning. And it was like people fighting, right? So I was obsessed with this karate show and I love this hat. So naturally, when I pretend like I'm in the karate show, that hat has to be on my head, right? That's like my alter ego to be the karate guy and to fight my buddies. But I remember I would only wear that hat. I would be barefoot and wear shorts, and I would be doing karate like most kids my age do at that age with my buddies in the front yard. And I remember being as early as, I had to have been 9 or 10 years old. I remember being self-conscious of not having my shirt on at an early age. And this is a big deal. You can imagine that as a 9, 10, 11-year-old already starting to feel that sort of confidence issue is kind of significant. And then if you add to it the fact that my buddies decided, because I was the chubby kid in the group, my buddies decided to call me Butterball. So here I am, Butterball, doing karate in the front yard with my buddies with my Loch Ness Monster hat, having no education on health and fitness. And this went on, and this went all the way up through all of my elementary school, middle school, until about 8th grade. I grew really fast and I leaned out. But naturally, because my habits were the same, I knew I had no nutritional training, no knowledge whatsoever of exercising, which is pretty funny now that I am a coach in my career and actually teach coaches to coach. You can imagine that after I got to high school, because of my lack of habits, my lack of education, my lack of guidance there, I gained weight again, and I made my way all the way up to almost 300 pounds. Now, the issue with that is I spent my entire senior year basically mentally smashed. I was just all over the place mentally. My confidence was just completely smashed because I just didn't feel good about my body. So this led me into all sorts of, diets that people do, right? The Atkins diet was very popular, simply not eating. Zone, like the zone or paleo and zone didn't come until later, but I had tried several different diets to get this weight off, and then nothing worked. And then eventually I ended up deciding that I was going to join the military, and that was going to be my attempt to turn my life around. There were some other relationship things in there that I needed to fix, but long story short, I had to do a very aggressive and fasting and malnourishing myself style approach to lose weight to get into the military. So then we fast forward a little bit more of the same thing. No nutritional knowledge, no education, none of these things. This went on even further to the point to where the minute I got out of the military, I gained weight back again. And this repetitive nature went on and on in my life until I finally decided that I was going to make a real change and educate myself. I actually stumbled on a quote years ago that said, education builds compliance. And you guys will see this later inside of this presentation here. Now, once I stumbled on that, for whatever reason, that quote really resonated with me. And it allowed me to really engulf myself into training. This led me to my love of coaching other people. And then I took it and made it my moral responsibility to pass this information on. So on top of the nutritional side, this also went on in exercise. I basically bounced in and out of any training program, any training modality, any training method for the better part of like 5 or 6 years before I ultimately landed on CrossFit. And then now what I do now, essentially all of it encompassed in one deliverable program. So just to put into perspective, my nutritional blunders, my exercise issues, all of these things come from the same place that I think a lot of our youth and our kids deal with today. Not knowing what good nutrition is, not knowing how important exercise is. And then in a lot of cases, unfortunately, parents aren't educated in that. They don't send us to school and teach us how to health and fitness, right? So I'm hoping by the end of this very webinar, you guys are going to get something out of it and at least have a practical, basic understanding of, one, how important these things are, but two, how to start to teach your children as well. So inside of our household, health and nutrition is a non-negotiable. It is a way of life and something that we do. And it's funny to actually see my kids, and this is not to impress you, and I'll say this again later, this isn't to impress you, this is to impress upon you what is possible. My kids know nothing of soda. They know nothing of, cookies being in the house normally, chips, nothing like that, because we have just made it our goal to make sure that my wife has a similar story, to make sure that we can deliver the same type of atmosphere that we wish we had as children. And I commend you guys if you're watching this webinar, because you're going to get that very information yourself. So in our household, to have a snack and an understanding of what protein and carbs and fats are has been something that we've spent many years at this point teaching our children, and something that they know. And it actually started with just basic quizzes of sitting at the table and saying, like, on your plate, what do you see? And getting them to determine what is a vegetable, what is a carbohydrate, what is a protein, what is a fat. And I've actually seen this transfer over to when they talk to their friends, when they go to their friends' houses, when we go to pick up our children and their parents are telling us about our children, essentially educating them in some nutritional practices. So this is super cool. And this exact information, guys, is the exact same things that we work with our children on and what we use with our adult clients as well. Okay. The slides like get hung and then they don't go forward. There we go. All right, so we're gonna. I mentioned before that we're gonna go through the four-headed monster. So this is essentially an all-encompassing look at how we view like fitness as a whole in both my own personal training practice and how you guys can start to look at it inside of like your children's health and fitness. Okay. So the first place we're going to stop off at is training. So kids and teens need to train mostly full body with their body weight or light resistance. Now we've all seen all of the, the old school train of thought of, kids should not lift weights. It'll mess with their growth plates. It can do a bunch of negative things to their tendons and ligaments. And since then, that's been disproven multiple times. And what we know now is that the rate at which kids grow and the type of memory that we can put inside of our kids' musculature, their tendons and ligaments, is established at an early age. So I would say at any age really that your children can understand the concept of proper mechanics and moving their bodies, it is a good time to start challenging them and allowing them to do full body training. So when I say full body, I'm talking, their upper, their lower, their core, all these different pieces getting worked out every single time they work out. I think a good place to start is to simply teach your kids basic body weight exercise, and then moving on into light resistance, mostly kettlebell light, mostly dumbbell, and then banded resistance also works well. And we'll unpack this on a deeper level towards the end, where I'll actually give you guys a template. And if you want to pause the video, if you're watching this in the future, or you're kind of following along now, you'll have an opportunity to either screenshot it. I'll also pass these slides off to both Phil and Jules, and they can share with you guys the slide deck with you guys too. But we'll have an exact training template at the end to where some of this will make a little bit more sense. But I'm just essentially going to lay out principles first so you guys can understand where a lot of this stuff comes from, okay? So kids and teens need to train mostly full body and with their body weight, and then moving on to light resistance after that. So, big time, depending on how old your kids are, some of them think that the first thing they need to do is start lifting heavy weights and stuff like that. I think a good place to start is with light resistance, because we want to teach our children and our youth, essentially at any age, something called motor control. So motor control is your brain's ability to make your body move the same way repeatedly, right? They learn it at an early age when they write. They learn it at an early age when they start to stand. They're just learning motor control over the muscle units in their body. The same thing applies when we go into things like training and exercising, okay? So how I approach training and how I approach a look at making workouts, or an understanding or teaching an understanding of workouts, is through something called movement patterns, okay? So I can't tell you guys, from my first like run in with fitness, all I knew about was, and you guys may have heard this too, back and biceps, chest and triceps, legs and shoulders, maybe don't even do legs at all, and then do abs, right? That's just something that everybody thinks. So that is looking at it as a body part split versus a movement pattern split. The reason why I believe, and a lot of my mentors and my coaches and stuff like that, the reason why we believe that movement patterns is a better approach is because it's a complete look at the body as a system, right? So rather than thinking of the bicep muscle, we think of pushing, right? Rather than thinking of the back or your lats, we think pulling, right? Because if we think pulling, there's also there's primary muscles working, of course, which are going to be your back muscles and the various muscle groups in there. But the other part of that too is an understanding that there are also secondary groups that are getting worked as well. The biceps, the forearms, the rear delts, and a pulling pattern as an example. So looking at training as a movement pattern allows you to look at it as a whole system. And then you guys are going to see as we move on, understanding patterns first will allow you to simply take an exercise, and it's just as simple as, multiple choice or a drag and drop style test. You can literally do that with exercising as well. So we look at it as these 5 specific, and now there's some coaches out there that will break this down and take it a little bit more, and we'll break it down into a few more. But I think for purposes of this training here, looking at it in 5 patterns is a very good way to approach it. So the first pattern we'll talk about is pushing. So pushing is anything where you're forcing load or resistance, whether it's your body weight, whether it's a band, a dumbbell, anything, where you're pushing resistance away from your structure. Okay, so that's things like push-ups, any sort of presses, and basically any upper body exercise going away from you. Okay, now when we start looking at things like pulling, just a very simple way to think of it is any rowing pattern, and that is bringing a resistance or a load or something to your structure or your body, also involving your upper body. Okay, so moving on from there, the third pattern is the bending pattern. So when you think bending pattern, a good way to create an understanding around that is it's anything to where your hips dominate the exercise, meaning you picking something off the ground, things like glute bridges, single leg glute bridges, anything requiring you to hinge at your hip joint is what I would classify as a bending exercise. And if you guys simply, or like if you're watching this now or you're watching this later, you can simply go in and type hinge dominant exercise into Google, and it'll drop like 30 to 50 exercises that you can choose from. And obviously you would want to start something as simple and easy to explain to your child first, okay? So moving on from there, I look at it as knee dominating exercise. So that it can encompass any form of squatting, and then any sort of lunging, whether it's a forward lunge, a reverse lunge, an elevated split lunge. I could go into like another 20, but just think of it as any exercise that your knee is dominating the movement, okay? And then the last one, the last group that I always like to talk about, and this is, guys, we always know the importance of core training, but your core literally connects everything together. And you'll see when we start to go through the templates how there's the core exercise is one part of every single day, but also on top of that, it is at the end of the workout so that it can be given attention to and not rushed through, which can happen a lot of times with the first exercise, okay? So the core is any exercise involving your abs, or a good way to think about it, any muscles that support your spine, okay? And Phil, just stop me if somebody's on live and got a question or something like that, okay? I gotta move my screen here so I can see. Okay, so I mentioned before that we were gonna touch on, oh, did I fast forward it here? I'm the worst at this, Phil, I apologize. Okay, so fuel. Fuel is a good way to think about fuel is your nutrition or your nourishment. Okay, then the first place that I always start with everybody, and a lot of times, if you think about nutrition, typically the first place that people go is diet, right? They think I need to do, your ketos, your paleos, your cleanses, your slow carb, your soma type, blood, like I looked it up online the other day. There's like 50 styles of diet. I'm here to tell you as a coach who has been in an industry for almost 10 years now and now coaching people on a deeper level in nutrition for the better part of 5 years, I know that there is not a one-size-fits-all diet for anybody, which is why when I approach the conversation around fuel, nourishment, or nutrition, I never discuss it from any particular diet standard because everybody is different. Everybody has specific preferences or ways that they view food. And I also know that for some people, nourishment, food, and diet as a whole is also a lot like politics, and it's just better off not to talk about it, okay? So my diet blunders essentially started with, I always talk about my fluffy paleo story, okay? So long story short, I had tried, like I said in kind of my intro, tons of different diets. I had tried the Atkins diet, the paleo, all these different things. And ultimately, the problem with everything and why I feel a diet to be an incomplete way of doing things is a diet is a box, right? This is saying I'm going to make my child or myself, or I'm going to watch my family or whoever, I'm going to make them eat within this box, right? I'm going to force them to fit. I'm going to, no matter what, I'm going to jam the square peg into the round hole, okay? Whereas looking at how you eat and how you do things as nutrition is I'm going to fit how I eat into whatever box I fit into best, right? Which is why when I teach things here, you're going to notice that this is something that will cover all spectrum. Notice I didn't stand here and say you should eat 25 carbs only and 1,000 calories. I said, hey, let's look at how we can fit these very principles here into your life, okay? So let's start off. The first thing is, I just call it simply your BLGs, okay? And if you look at the diagram on the right here, BLGs simply stands for your basic lifestyle guidelines. So a good way to approach nutrition with, your children, and I'm going to encourage you guys as I go through this, that it's always a good thing to practice some of this with your child because they see you leading and they get excited about that and they want to kind of join you in it. I think that's a good way to go too. When we think about BLGs, a good way to look at this is, what is there, 8 things here on the right side in that diagram? Simply pick 1 to 2 of those and focus on those first, right? So we'll kind of go through each one of them and we'll unpack them a little bit, right? So there's, when I think about like a basic lifestyle guideline and nourishing our bodies, we got to understand there's only 24 hours a day, and working only and never resting is a good recipe for disaster and a good way to burn your body out and to make it to where it doesn't really matter what type of nutrition you have. So understanding that you have to work and you have to train your body and you have to make, you got to tell your children that it is okay to work hard and exercise, but it is also just as important to make sure that they get downtime and rest as well. Okay. Now the next one is a little aggressive, but it's something that I truly believe in, is that one day we're going to die. We got to remember that we want to get out. We want to get living. We don't just want to spend. And this is something that I think a lot of people are discovering right now during COVID-19, is that we think fitness and training and movement is something specifically related to a gym atmosphere. whereas where a real way to think about it is that fitness as a whole is an expression of movement in the body, not necessarily the gym or exercise equipment or any of that. So reminding people that they're going to die one day and get over it and get living is to remember that there are other ways to move our body, and to express movement in our body other than something specifically to just exercise as it's classified, or just something gym or training program specific. Okay. So another BLG, and one that I work a lot with people, and this is a big deal when it comes to the weight loss community, is making sure just simply drinking enough water. 9 out of 10 clients are not drinking enough water. I bet you might take a look at yourself right now if you're watching this and think like, oh man, you may have already think like, I didn't drink enough water today, right? And that's something that I really want you to think about. A good rule of thumb is half your body weight in ounces per day, right? So if you are, a 100-pound person, or your child is a 100-pound person, try to give them a goal of drinking half their body weight in ounces. It's a good place to make sure that they are getting, an adequate amount of hydration every single day. Okay. So Phil shared with me earlier today about the next one, which is go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, and circadian rhythm. Our body is a very rhythmic system, meaning having our children go to bed and wake up around the same times every day. You'd be amazed at just simply change in the mood that you'll see. And I know a lot of kids right now are finding themselves on the Xbox and on the TV and their phones and doing things a little later into the night and then sleeping in. And you may find that with your child that day, and I actually have found this with my children as well. I literally on this past Saturday, my son decided that he wanted to play Fortnite until 12:30 at night. My wife and I were already in bed, and that proceeded to destroy the rest of the day. And when we did some digging, what we essentially realized is that he had stayed up too late the night before, and it completely threw off his rhythm the other day because on Sunday night into Monday, he fell asleep at the appropriate time, and Monday he was back to not being a demon anymore. So we essentially learned that the rhythm of his body was affected, and it rings true with just thinking of our body as a rhythmic system. Okay. So, and another way to approach this too is to remember that, the sun rising and going down fits with our lifestyle. So trying to simply calm down as it gets dark at night and rise early and get moving for the day when the sun comes up is also something that serves the rhythm of our body. So water, moving blood, and digestion are very essential things. So if you want to unpack that simple piece there, again, doubling down on hydration, having daily routines. Maybe sometimes people look at daily routines and they get overwhelmed, but just something to think about is that just having some sort of rhythm, right? See how all these things kind of blend together as we go through this. And then knowing that moving blood is just simply another way of saying, get out, move your body, okay? So recovery blood flow helps to heal faster. So moving every day. And the reason why I feel like that's a big deal is because sometimes people will go really hard 1 or 2 days, and then they do nothing the next 2 days, and they kind of sit around and don't do anything. And this is huge, especially for a child who's going to possibly exercise maybe for the first time or overdo something for the first time. They may find themselves stiff and sore the next day. You would be amazed that if you can encourage them to go, walk for 15 to 20 minutes, maybe to stand up and do some squats, do a burpee contest with them. You'll be amazed at just simply moving some blood through their system, what it can do to unlock the body. And these two can probably attest to that, as when they do a crazy workout and they get super stiff, if they stay home, they actually feel worse than if they came back in and moved their body a little bit. Can you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about working out is you work out really hard and then you stay home the next day to chill or take an ice bath or whatever. But
absolutely,
definitely the opposite. Get out, move your body, you feel way better.
Right. And if you parents are going to be embarking on this fitness thing and this training thing with your kids, you're going to find yourself in the same place. And be reminded that when you're feeling that next day soreness, or that, people call it DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, when you feel that, just remember, oh yeah, Cody said that I need to get up and move. And then you can send me that thank you email later, and I'll send you a high five, because we can't high five in person right now. Now the last piece, if you disregard everything in there, the biggest thing I really want you to pay attention to is to sit down and to chew your food. Okay. Now this goes even deeper, and this is where we kind of touch on digestion a little bit. We've all been guilty of either A, eating in our car, driving from thing to thing. This is from your kids where, my mom and dad, essentially, we lived off of McDonald's drive-through, and I remember pounding my double cheeseburger and chicken nuggets and French fry and soda on the way home so that I could just go to bed when I got home, right? But I essentially would chew it 1 or 2 times and it was down my throat and into my stomach. Chewing your food, just simply put, does a couple things. Number one, it makes it very digestible as it goes through your intestines to make sure that your body and your stomach can get as much possible nutrient out of it as possible. But the other part of it too is as you chew, your body starts to salivate a little bit more. The different fluids and oils in your body that are part of this digestion process secrete just a little bit more when it knows that food's coming. And a lot of times it just doesn't simply have enough time to get ready if it just goes down the throat really quick because you chewed your food you chewed your meal 1 or 2 times and swallowed it. Also sitting down, being mindful, right? A lot of times we eat so fast, or we stand up and we eat and we kind of pick at things, and we're never really mindful of if we're actually hungry anymore. Right. So, and this is something you could practice with your child too. If you have a child that is snacking a ton or eats really, really fast, and you maybe think they're overeating a little bit too much, or they're going for the snack cabinet too soon, like all of my boys do, like you can't fill that stomach enough. Sometimes just simply slowing them down will allow their brain, right? Because we eat and it goes down to our stomach really fast, but our brain hasn't been triggered by our stomach that it's full yet, right? And this is where overeating comes into play. Right? But just simply slowing down, chewing your food, being mindful, and going through good conversation is a good way to start to kind of go in the opposite direction of some of these things. Okay.
Hey Cody, I got a question for you. Do you find that we talk about having like the family dinner table? Do you find that's a good thing also for like digestion, not only just the conversation, but because I noticed it says that about setting the phone aside and having conversation with your kids, that could be a big thing. Is just during this time when we've been home more as a family together, we've sat down at the table together, and I know that's changed our relationships, but that also will change our health approach too.
Yeah, it definitely affects the biological approaches too as well. And here's why. Well, one, I'm going to share something cool that we play with our family. You guys can take it. You guys can do this at home too. We've actually done a whole, and I'd love to talk about this too. We've done a whole thing to where we've actually worked on culture in our family. We approach our culture. I'm an entrepreneur. Like I want to build stuff all the time and make it better and change the whole world and everybody's life in the future. But I would taken that same approach of how we create culture and community and different, my words are escaping me, but just different ways to create that same kind of culture in my family. So I'll share that with you guys too. But first, to Jules' question, right now, everybody's stressed. Kids are out of school. Kids are not seeing their friends. They are, and I just know this from talking with my son, like they are feeling things the same way the adults are. It's just different, right? I asked my son if he was sad that he doesn't get to graduate. He's a 5th grader this year. He was looking forward to their trip to Camp Coleman, and it was something that he talked about since 3rd grade. And he's not going to get to go to Camp Coleman. He also doesn't get to walk the stage as a 5th grader. I, to this day, remember my 5th grade graduation and how dressing up and walking across the stage in front of all my family, I remember that the same way I remember my senior graduation. And it just reminded me that my son is also my son, who, he can tell me and have these, these type of level-headed conversations now as an 11-year-old. He shared with me essentially that he's stressed, right? So Jules, when the body is stressed, it typically wants to protect us, right? So some of the processes that it deems less important, like maybe digestion and stuff like that, get affected negatively when we are stressed. So because we know that, if we throw in the fact that we're not being mindful when we're eating, we're not chewing our foods, we're not trying to do things like when you have a conversation with your family, stress gets reduced. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a known thing. So when you reduce stress, you actually make your body more open to nourishing itself because it doesn't feel like it's having to protect you as much. And this is something that I think, this is why this is such a big deal. So that's the first part. And so did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome. And then the second part of that too, this can be a game that you can play with your kids. This is something huge that we do in our family, and it's been so much fun. And I'll tell you a story about it after. So we play a game called Happies and Crappies, right? So we go around the table, and everybody at the table shares a happy, the happiest point of the day, and then the crappiest point of the day. And typically we'll do crappy first and then finish with a high note, right? But we'll go around, and it's interesting to hear my 5-year-old tell me about something that bothered him that day that I totally missed, right? And the same thing with my 11-year-old, and the same thing with myself and my wife. And then it's interesting now because it's created this openness of communication inside of our house over the dinner table, which guess what? We sit down, we chew, we digest, right? And this kind of came about, I don't know, a few months ago, and it was really funny because a couple of weeks ago we broke the rules, and we had some time with some friends, and some friends had friends over that we didn't know, but we had spent this whole day together, and we essentially just, shared some time together, and it was very nice. But we sat down at the dinner table, and my sons now have connected happies and crappies to every time we eat for dinner. So what do? Dad, we have to do happies and crappies. And my wife at the time was like, we're not going to do happies and crappies. We don't know these people. And he's like, nope, we're doing it. And he makes everybody at the table go around and share a happy and crappy. And it was funny to watch people that we don't know, to listen to some of this stuff and connect with them on a deeper level just by doing a simple exercise. But what's happening during that time? A 10-minute quick scarf down meal, go back outside, turned into 60 minutes of sitting there and listening to everybody and connecting on a deeper level, which I would venture to say that everybody there nourished their body just a little bit differently that day and enjoyed their food just a little bit more. Okay. So I could hang out there all day long and talk about that, but let's move on a little bit here.
Okay.
So let's talk about macronutrients. Now, this is a big deal because this is where you guys as parents can start to combat all of the diet type stuff that's going to get thrown at you constantly by all the clever marketing out there. And it's going to be thinking this could be something that you like, oh, wow, that looks like it would be great for my son or my daughter. When you guys start to understand these principles, it's going to be very easy for you to combat some of these thoughts that kind of come into play, or some of these things that come your way. Okay. So macronutrients, simply put, are proteins, carbs, and fats. Okay. And then micronutrients, which isn't on this slide because that can get kind of sticky too. Micronutrients are all the vitamins and minerals that you get from foods. Okay. A good place to start, and then that those are super important as well. But just to keep this conversation as basic as possible, we'll discuss just macronutrients. All macronutrients are essential, period. Which is why sometimes as a nutrition coach that actively coaches people, I have to very politely disagree with some of the diet practices that are out there that don't eat protein or don't eat carbs, because all of them serve specific functions in the body that are important. Okay, so when we think of protein is anything like tissue rebuilding, cell regeneration, your body's ability to heal the muscle fibers or your tissues or anything for that matter. From any sort of damage or work for the day. And a lot of times when people are undernourished on protein, you may find that stiffness and soreness and those types of things hang around a little bit longer than usual. Okay. And then moving on from there, carbohydrates, or carbs for short, that's your energy pathway, right? That is the food that you consume, right? A carbohydrate, just in a basic way of speaking, a carbohydrate turns into glucose, turns into glycogen, and then essentially glycogen turns into your energy source for your muscle fibers, okay? Protein rebuilds them, carbohydrates fuel them. So this is good for your energy. Carbohydrates are known now to really help with brain function. So a lot of people, I found this with my own son, when he was experiencing kind of concentration issues and I described brain fog to him one time, and he was like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. We kind of messed around with the types of carbohydrates he was eating, and we actually saw an improvement from that. And that's 100% anecdotal. That's not something that's been studied or tested yet. I don't know that they're actively testing kids and using them in studies. I think that's something they probably shouldn't do quite yet, but that's just something I've discovered. And then carbohydrates also assist with muscle growth as well. Protein and carbohydrates together help for growing muscle. So if you think about your children, and some of them, we all had that child that goes from being 4'0" to 4'6" in a couple months. You can imagine the amount of muscle growth that's going on inside of there too. So that's when we start to think that how significant proteins and carbohydrates are inside of this very process, okay? Now, when we get to fats, there are several different types of fats. I didn't want to go too deep in on them here, but just fat content as a whole is good for your brain health. But mainly think of fats, the types of fat sources that you get, as your hormone highway, right? So for growing children, you can see where this is significant and make sure that they have a good, healthy source of fat in their daily diet every day to help with some of their growth and some of the things that they're going to be experiencing as they get older. Okay, so we'll kind of dive into just a few examples here. And this will help you too, because I think sometimes it's hard to really tell because some specific food types also have other macronutrients involved as well. But when I start to classify these in the examples that I have here, this is just saying that this is their primary macronutrient source. It doesn't mean that they don't have any other macros in it. And as an example, potatoes also have carbs in them and then a few grams of fat. Avocados have a bunch of carbohydrates in them and a couple grams of protein. Like they are spread around a little bit, but the main source that we should view them as is this particular classification, okay? So protein is any of your, a lot of fish and seafood, beef, poultry, and eggs is a basic way to look at it. Yes, peanut butter has protein in it as well, but it is primarily a fat source, as an example. Carbohydrates or any of your potatoes, your fruits, your rice, things like oats. I mean, there's tons of other carbohydrates, but just basically speaking, this is a good way to view it, like what a carbohydrate is. Now, I got veggies with the double star, and I'm going to talk about it last because yes, vegetables primarily are a carbohydrate, but they are very low in carbohydrate. So I actually think they pair up with all of the other carbohydrates. So if we were to build a meal just, to stop where we are right now, you could simply do some chicken, some sweet potatoes, and then have some veggies with it, right? And then you would sprinkle in, or maybe you would cook that chicken in olive oil, right? So now you can start to see how to build a complete meal. And this leads me to the last part, which is your fats. This is any of your oils, avocados, nuts, seeds, any sort of nut butter that you would have, things like coconut oil, olive oil, avocado oil, all these different things are primarily fat sources. So a good thing to talk about with your kids and a good game that you can play with them is when you guys are eating dinner, number one, try to have them and you too build a plate to where you have a protein source, primarily a protein source, a carbohydrate source, and a fat source. Protein, carbs, fats, and veggies is a good thing. It is a good way. If you think about your plate was split into 4 halves or 4 quarters, if you will, that would be a good way to look at how to build a plate. And then that game, and this is actually something we used to play when we had a kids program a while back. We had bought a bunch of toy, the toy foods that go with the stoves and the sinks and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. We would actually have them. We would have a whiteboard that said carbs, a whiteboard that said protein and fats and veggies. And I would actually have them grab the vegetable or the fruit and go put it in front of the proper classification. We did this during our summer camps as well. So if you have a very young child, you can do that. Another way would just be to simply tell your kids and teach them and then quiz them on it, days later. You could say like, hey, where's your protein at on your plate? Hey, where's your carbohydrate on your plate? Where's your fats at? And for us, it's funny to listen to our sons. My oldest son calls my middle son the carb monster because our son Nathan loves his potatoes. He loves his fruits. He typically will eat that first on his plate. And we often have to fight him to eat his protein. And then we have another son, our youngest, who he literally just wants to eat protein and he tries to throw his vegetables on the floor, right? But it's interesting to watch our kids kind of joke like, Holden is the protein guy and Nathan's the carb monster and I'm the only one that eats all of it, right? So it's a cool little fun thing that we watch our kids go through and talk about, but it's all based off of some of these principles that we're talking about here.
So Cody, one quick thing. So I have a friend, like their kids like only like to eat like certain foods. So like they'll, maybe in one of those categories, they only want to eat chicken. They won't eat other things, or maybe they only want to eat like chicken nuggets or something like that. Is that does that matter so much? Or, cause I've heard a lot of stuff, like make sure you're eating a variety of foods. But if your kids are super picky, Or then I also think about the flip side of that, and kind of a follow-up question would be like budget wise. You know, there's certain foods that are probably going to be more bang for your buck.
Yeah.
But if you have kids that are just going to like focus on one type in each one of those categories, is that like better than
Yeah,
not,
absolutely.
not
So
bearing?
I think I kind of know where you're, so two ways to answer that question. So essentially you're like, is there a macronutrient that is more important than the other if you had to choose? Is that essentially what you're asking for one?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, you know, I understand like having a balance of a protein, carb, and fats, but say for instance, like your kid will not eat vegetables. So is it kind of like a trade-off for other carbs, or they will only eat chicken, but they won't eat beef?
Yeah.
That kind
So
of thing.
ultimately at a certain level, I'll tell you how we approached it in our household, in our family with our children. Some people watching this may think it's a little more aggressive, but for us, it was something that worked. But to your point and to your question, eating those macronutrients, period, is fine, right? Because ultimately, yes, you cannot make a kid eat a certain thing, and you don't want to turn it into a miserable experience at your table. And this includes budget-wise. And I think, and we've actually tested this. Budget-wise, it's not that much of a difference as long as you're not trying to live in organic land or, you know, some of those particular places, right? And then it becomes more expensive when you don't eat the fruits and vegetables and they kind of go bad and you got to buy more, right? So that's one way to answer that question, and I hope that kind of clears it up. Like eating something obviously is better than eating nothing. How we approached it, and we really struggled with our middle son. Our son Nathan would literally only eat rice and whole grain Barilla. I can't remember the spiral pasta, or rotini. Sorry, he would only eat the rotini pasta and like sweet potatoes and rice. That's all he would eat. We couldn't get him to eat chicken. And I did this when my wife was on night shift because I live a different way, and I just have a particular belief pattern. But somebody said this to me, and it really stuck with me. I was actually listening to it on a podcast. And the guy essentially said that your child will eat if they're hungry, right? A lot of times they can go without something if they're not hungry. So I'm not sitting here telling you to starve your child. That is not what I'm saying. Don't go and turn this off and say, Cody told me to starve my child. But what I am saying is that I started to feed my child what I wanted him to eat the most first, right? So, and I remember multiple breakfasts. We are a turkey sausage eating family. It's just what we do. It's not for any particular health reason. It just tastes better to us. And my middle son would not eat turkey sausage. He would literally only eat his fruit. He wouldn't eat his eggs. He wouldn't eat none of this stuff. So I decided that I was going to have him eat turkey sausage first. So every morning I would serve him his turkey sausage. I wouldn't even give him the opportunity to decide on fruit or eggs. I would hand the turkey sausage. He would stare at it, and he would look up at me, and he would stare at it, and he would look up at me, and sometimes he wouldn't eat until lunch. But after a day or two of it, and realizing that dad's not playing, he would taste it. And a lot of times it's not necessarily that the kid doesn't like it. It's either a texture thing, or they simply think it looks weird, right? So eventually, as we started doing this, we got to a point where he ate his sausage regularly. So then I filtered in eggs. He started doing eggs. And we actually are doing this with our baby right now, to where we put vegetables on his plate first. And sometimes he'll push it off and he won't eat until breakfast the next day. And if we just remember that if our kids are hungry, they'll eat, then that's the basic way to put it. And I realize that telling you guys that it is a little aggressive, but I'm just being 100% authentic and transparent with how we've done it. And we've had a lot of success to where now we can sit down and have a full meal as a family. And the baby is working on his vegetables, and he, had broccoli for the first time last night, and he ate it. And then what's funny about it is he was eating and he's going, like he was excited to eat it. He just simply didn't want to taste it because it looked weird, right? So another way that you can answer that too is to make sure that you're getting creative with how you cook it, right? So trying different things, not just steaming it, especially with vegetables. Your parents are going to find that vegetables are hard to get your kids to eat. So get creative. You could try things for vegetables like peppers. You could try asparagus. canned greens are better than no greens at all. We couldn't get our son to eat green beans, so we started doing canned green beans. That's better than no green beans at all. So just getting creative at how you can approach this from every angle, and then you'll be surprised at what you'll find your kids will be open to. A lot of times for me, my mom used to always try to force feed me steamed cabbage, and I just wasn't into it. Brussels sprouts aren't really my friend. And I actually found later that my wife baked them with olive oil and salt and pepper that I actually do like them. So it's just kind of getting creative and coming from different angles. So hopefully that answered your question, Jules. And then my aggressive parenting is just something that's how we do it. And it worked well for us.
No, that answers that question. And I can see for me on a personal level, my daughter's just now a year old. So like looking forward, I'd just be interested to see how that would work for teenagers that are a little bit older and can, get their own food and stuff like that. And I think one thing for me that's helped is just not having the things in the house that are tempting. So like the little Debbie snack cakes and things like that you're talking about in the beginning. So just kind of, and then Tiffany had a question here. So the school does provide lunches for the kids right now. I don't know if you're if you guys are picking those up yet, but so the schools provide the lunch for them. And Tiffany, I'm not exactly sure what's in all of those, but she said that it's not typically the best healthiest food.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate kind of like limiting that which they are getting from the school lunches, and then like the healthy stuff that that parents can provide?
Yeah, obviously if you don't have a choice and you are going to eat the school, like we don't want, I did tell a story about how I would make my kids not eat or my kids would essentially learn that like we got to eat what's on the table because it's good for us versus not. That's one way to kind of cut it. But obviously the lunches coming from school, eating those versus not eating at all is a good way to go. Another way you can frame this whole thought process is just maybe having them aware, like creating awareness of it. Okay. Of like, hey, what am I eating here? What am I eating there? Why would I want to eat these types of things? And then I would say if they're going to eat whatever the school is coming, then to just maybe watch because the thing with a lot of these types of foods is that they're highly palatable and it's easy to overeat them because they taste good. And I think something that I kind of glazed over with describing how we approach nutrition in our house is that a lot of times you have to train the palate to, like, if you think about, like, if you're only eating salty foods or sugary foods all the time, and then you have something that's not, on a neurological level, your body's going to want that stuff, right? So over time, just like when somebody enters a room and they have really strong cologne on, and it kind of hits you in the face, and eventually it doesn't smell as bad anymore, or it doesn't, the smell isn't as potent anymore. The same thing goes for like the palate of how you eat foods and stuff like that. Those things get, a way that they're triggered by foods kind of goes away after a long term. So to answer that question, eat something versus not eat nothing. Create awareness over what they're putting in their bodies and just getting them on the right page. I would even tell you from, an overweight teenager, which is how I live my life forever, things would have been a little different if I just had some education on it, because they don't teach it in schools, right? Parents combating that with just maybe creating awareness and teaching them and showing them some of these things that we're going over here, and then trying to make sure that they're nourishing them outside of those particular things as best they can.
Okay. I think I was just going to throw in there too that that sometimes, a lot of times, the packaging on that food is really well done, and it's also kind of misleading that it can be healthy because maybe it only has 100 calories in it, but those 100 calories are like the worst calories you could eat for that day. So so just helping your kids, like, have them look at the packaging with you and be like, hey, this is why we don't eat a lot of this, because here's what's actually in it, can be that education piece to help your kids kind of see that a little bit.
Yeah. And then to piggyback on that a little bit too, Phil, parents, when you're talking to your children, make sure that you don't label things good and bad, right? You don't want to label something a bad, like, this is a bad food, this is a good food. I would label them simply as food and maybe a better option, right? Because that can create a relationship with like what they're eating of like, I can't do that, that's bad. And you never want to be a person at a cookout that's like, I can't eat cookies, that's bad. Because I'm not going to sit here and tell you should never eat it either. I am aware, and I have 1 week every week when I personally and my family, we do ice cream, we do these things as well. But I think creating a healthy relationship with what is simply food and then what is simply a better option is a good way to start to look at it, because you never want to have a kid start to think good and bad, because that can affect them long term. But I think if you just start simply with just educating them and being careful with the types of words that you attach to things, that can go a long way too. Okay. And Jules, hopefully I answered your question. There's not really a good answer for that, because I'm aware that, if school lunch is all you can get, school lunch is like, and my son sometimes would come home and be like, Dad, they had this disgusting thing at school and I didn't want to eat it. Usually we would personally combat that with, we actually were teaching him how to build a lunch himself. And this is my oldest son. And it started with us building the lunch with him, allowing him to pick things out of the grocery store that he liked and be like, hey, we want you to have a protein and a carb and a fat with your meal every day this week, and allowing him to kind of pick things out like lunch meats, and he would build lunch meats. One of our favorite things to build sandwiches with is this particular bread called Dave's Killer Bread. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing bread. It's got seeds and stuff in it too. So it's just has a really good taste and a good consistency to it. That's how we personally approached it. But as far as like, I would prefer a child would eat versus not eat, because that can lead to under eating, which can be a problem of its own later. And then just making sure that they're at least being educated on what they are putting in their body.
Sure. So maybe even allowing them to be part of the shopping process too, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Because like you said, like, I think that awareness of like what foods are and what's in them, and then maybe the baby steps. Like, I know for one thing for us, like white bread was a huge one in our house. Like, oh man, it's really, really good. But then we did find a bread that was a little bit more nutritionally sound that we enjoy. So even just those small changes, do you think can have some long-term effects?
Yeah, and think about it as like a dial, right? We just want to turn it towards the better as much as possible, right? So it's like, hey, we're eating French fries and cheeseburgers. Okay, now we're just eating French fries. Now we're starting, you know what I mean? And starting to kind of shift that to the other side is a good way to approach it. And I'm here to tell you that it'll go like this and it'll come back a little bit. And then it'll go like this, you know what I mean? Like, it's this constant battle. And we live in a time to where like those highly palatable foods are everywhere. And then now there's even some, the way that they're doing other foods that were once considered like whole foods and healthy per se. So I just think combating that, the best way to combat that is just with awareness.
Sure.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's talk about recovery next. So again, with the four-headed monster, right? We talked training, we talked nutrition, essentially, or fuel, and now we're talking recovering. This goes in line with some of those BLGs of knowing that we can't just exercise 7 days a week. We can't move our bodies and do crazy things without any downtime. And then another parallel to remember, especially when it comes to our kids, how fast they're growing. Guess what happens when their bones and their structure is growing? A lot of times their bones will simply grow faster than their muscles do, which can lead to tightness. I've seen many kids that we work with at the youth level when I coach youth sports, to where, they'll be able to touch their toes one season, and then they'll come to play baseball with us after the football season a few months later, and they've grown significantly and they can no longer touch their toes. And this is a big deal to remember, because that sort of thing can kind of lead to just how their body acts as a mechanism, and maybe possibly injury and stuff like that as well, or pain or things like that. So you're not going to go and make a bunch of change in a child's musculature in their body just because they're growing so rapidly, and that thing will eventually come up. But I just think this is a good practice to start teaching them now, to where they have a healthy relationship with why this is important later. When you guys know, as parents, sometimes touching our toes can be a chore. And we may find that we get things like back pain or hip pain or shoulder pain. All that comes from just simply not mobilizing our body and stretching at a young age, and then on through, our teenage years and early adulthood, and et cetera, et cetera. So a good way to approach this, and then remembering that, like, Kids are going to shorten, or kids' muscles are going to shorten and lengthen as they go. I think it's important daily, and this is something we actually practice. This is like right out of our family rule book here, is that we have our kids pick one upper body and one lower body stretch per day. You can literally go on YouTube and have them look something up, and just simply, 1 to 2 minutes of holding a stretch. This can be, for your lower body, maybe a split leg forward fold, right? Could be a good lower body stretch for their hamstrings. And maybe their upper body could be something as simple as going across their chest, holding it for a minute, right? Just something basic and simple to start to create these things in our kids. And when I think of recovery, I think of stretch and walk, right? Walking, we've talked about this before, promotes blood flow. You can also group walking with just simply movement. Okay, so having your children move a little bit every day actually trains something called the aerobic system in their body. The aerobic system is the base of basically all of your life and your movement and your body and how it recovers as a whole. So this is why I think it's a really important thing to classify in the recovery category and to group as a whole when we're talking about youth health and fitness. Where's my marker here? There we go. Okay, so belief, the last piece. So this is kind of what we've talked about, and we've already dove into this a lot already, is kids ask why a ton, right? At all ages, from teenage years all the way down to a 5-year-old. Hey, I want you to do this. Why? Right? And a lot of times we'll simply answer with, because we said so, right? Just go do it, right? Whereas kids are asking why because they're curious, because they want to know if why I'm doing this thing is important or significant or not, right? So simply telling them, especially when we're talking about health and fitness, why these things are important and having these types of conversations with our children are a big deal. Teaching them and educating them and equipping them with these sort of resources at any age before adulthood is a big deal. We have the highest level of obesity, the highest level of anxiety, depression, long-term illness directly correlated to health and fitness ever. It's the highest levels ever. And I think this starts with our kids. This is how we turn these things around, by teaching them these very practices and educating them. I said earlier in this webinar today that education drives compliance, but also awareness precedes change, right? So if you want to change and start to just implement some of these things with your children, just simply picking, 1 or 2 of them and becoming aware of them and then teaching your kids is going to turn that dial to better, right? It's going to take it from no education to a little bit. And this is a big deal. I want you guys to teach them what you learned today. Have a conversation with them. Make it a game at dinner to talk about nutrition. Yell out an exercise to them. Tell them to do 5 reps. Ask them what type of movement pattern that is. Was that a push? Was that a squat? You just did a push-up. What was that? Like, start to play these games with them other than my kid would literally play Fortnite for 24 hours a day if I let him. But challenging him in on a level like this is going to equip him in the long run. Sure, maybe I'm annoying now, but in the long run, when he's able to have these types of conversations with people who haven't been educated on them, it's going to be a big deal for him. All of this is really surface level. And the thing about, health and fitness and training and all these things is that everything I taught you guys today is literally free on Google. You can go Google any of the things that we went over today, and you're going to find those answers for free. But you can also always come back to these slide decks and be able to associate the conversations that we've had today with them as well. I don't know why this slide deck gets hung every time. There we go. All right, so let's talk about how to glue these things together. So with the 4-headed monster, a good way to think about this whole thing, guys, is to just pick one head of the monster and work on it for a week, right? So say, hey, this week in our family with my child, I'm going to start talking to them about fuel. Pick a couple of the categories that we went over today and talk about it for a little bit every day. Then you can move on to training. Then you can move on to trying to educate them in some of these things as a whole and how they all fit together in the broader spectrum of things. But just picking one head of the monster and then moving forward is a very simple approach. And I want to encourage you, don't move on to the next part until you feel your child has a basic understanding of what you worked on for that week. If they're still kind of off in this thing, this isn't a rush. Depending on how old your children are, they're very pliable. They're ready to receive this. Sure, it might be boring, but they're ready. Their brain is ready. The synapses in a child's brain is way more receptive to learning than it is when you get into as you get into adulthood. So starting to layer these things on and really taking your time is a good way to ensure that these things take seed in your child's brain and they start to learn some of these concepts. And here's my challenge to you guys. Join in with your child. If you don't practice some of these things already, do it. Just pick one of them. It could be a fun opportunity for you to bond with your child on some of these levels. We have many people and these two can attest to this too. And we have many families and parents. Phil's entire his entire circle is a part of our gym and have been for years. From an early age, I can remember his daughters when they were tiny, and I was the creepy tall guy that was coaching dad. That I remember them being there, and then they trained there. But it all started at a young age, and it came from the kids watching the parents. So parents, my challenge to you is to join in with your kids on some of this stuff. I believe that when the young one sees you, they get inspired. And we talk about true leadership. Yeah, there's several layers of leadership, but it also starts with us as parents to guide our children, and of course these two here who are also leaders for your children as well.
Cody, a question popped in about how much to worry about movement patterns with kids at younger ages. Is it more important to teach them just to take breaks away from the computer, getting outside, running around, doing that sort of thing, or having some sort of maybe these exercises that you're going to talk through with a younger kid, maybe an elementary age kid?
Yeah. So number one, like I said before, it's like a dial, right? So if parents at home, if you're kind of curious of like where to start, or where your child's super young, pick one. Say, hey, we're going to talk about, I'm going to teach them one of these knee bending exercises. My first thing I've taught all my children, I'm going to teach, our baby's kind of doing it now as well, is the squat. So say, hey, we're going to talk about squats. That could be a good starting place. Maybe pick one exercise and do one of those exercises per day. My son is 5, my middle son is 5, and he kind of watches all of it and just mimics us. But if I were to say like where to start, even children at a very young age, pick one single exercise, talk to them about it. Say, hey, you're working on all the muscles in your legs when you do the squat, and have them do, 10 reps. Sometimes if you want to play a really cool game, all the adults hate this, but if you want to play a really cool game, play the Flower Song by Moby, Bring Sally Up, Bring Sally Down, and have your child squat with the song, right? We've done this as early as 4 years old with our middle son, and they think it's funny because they're moving with the song. So that's a cool thing. You can do that with push-ups. You can pretty much do that with sit. I mean, you could do it with a lot of different exercises, but maybe just start with 1-2 exercises. Don't necessarily approach it as, they have to have like a full workout. That was just kind of like a basic framework. But you could say like, hey, for 10 minutes, we're going to go run to the fence and we're going to come back and do, 5 squats and 5 burpees. And we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And parents, I'm telling you, depending on how old your kids are, the exercise is going to look terrible. But especially at a young age, they're just having fun moving their body and sweating with mom and dad, right? So that's kind of how I approach it. Did that kind of answer your question there, Phil?
I think so. I think it's
yeah.
I remember when my kids were younger, they just wanted to go hang out, and they saw us moving. And so then they want to move too. So being able to, I think you can scare them away by trying to push it too much on them at too young too. Yeah. So making it fun, making it a game, making it, exciting is important.
Yeah. And I'll share with you something we've done with our, so I also teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I actually teach, we call it the Minions class. And it's our 4 to 6 year olds. We play a game. We have a contest. Kids love being competitive. Hey, in the next minute, who can do the most push-ups? And then it turns into a game. The same thing with jiu-jitsu. Like, we don't want to make it to where jiu-jitsu is something that's like a discipline to them. We actually don't even say we're going to go practice. We say we're going to go play jiu-jitsu. So you could do the same thing with exercise as well. Like, hey, let's go have a squat race, or let's go have a burpee race, or, like make it fun, kind of like you said. I think that's a great way to frame it.
Yeah, I know my kids are older now, but I've been like trying to encourage them to get out, and finally a couple weeks ago I was just like, hey, we're just going for a walk. We're just gonna go for a walk down along the water, and they're like, oh, okay. But I've been asking them to go for a walk or a run for weeks before that. It's just how you frame it for them to make it palatable, like you said. So it's
Absolutely.
great.
Absolutely. So parents looking at these exercise templates that I'm putting up here, this is more or less for your own education. I won't go too much into these things. So this is just an example of how to, depending on, like Phil said, how old or young your child is. This is just a good framework. So I would encourage you to screenshot this. Again, I'm going to share the slide deck with Phil. Any of these are very basic, simple exercises that you can, YouTube or Google, and they'll teach you how to do them. You can also look up something called CrossFit Kids. They also have a very cool way of explaining things and teaching things as well. If I had like another, as always, I'm running over here. If I had like another 2 hours, I would, go into each one of these exercises and then cool ways to teach your kids. But if you go and simply YouTube or Google these, you will find tons of explanations, and then you can find a way to kind of make it fun and creative for your children. But this is just for you guys to start to see some of the back end framework of what I was talking about with those movement patterns. And like literally, if we're talking about, super young kids, we can start with like a squat or a burpee, right? And then if we're talking about, and for our kids, we've, as young as 4 years old, we actually had, we'd pick 3 exercises out of this and say, hey, for 10 minutes, we're going to race. We're going to do 5 of each. And then they just think it's kind of fun, and they go through the exercises really fast. Kids love burpees at a young age. Adults are going to hate them, but just something to think about. But as you get older and the kids get older, you can start to use more of these patterns together. So you could say like, okay, our workout today is going to have one of each one of these exercises, depending on how old or young they are. My son at 11 years old, I feel comfortable at this point to throw all 5 of these categories together in one workout. And we actually train them like that for baseball and football.
Yeah, I was going to say some kids, especially middle school and high school, may know some of these exercises from doing them at school or in sports or something. And it might just be a great opportunity for us as parents to get in there and do it with them, to encourage them to keep doing it, even though those sports and different things aren't happening right now.
Yeah. So on top of that, Phil, that's a good point. So I've showed you guys all this stuff, and we've gone into the education, and I think where I should have thrown a slide in here more or less is implementation, right? So I think right here I have day 1, day 2, day 3, right? For kids, for the younger they are, take, day 1, pick 2 of those 5, categories on that screen. As they're a little bit older, and maybe if your kid's never done any exercise whatsoever, this will be their first go at it. Pick one of them and kind of slowly ramp it up over the upcoming weeks. Maybe have them do 2 days, like you can kind of get creative with it. However, implementation as a whole, I think a cool thing to do, and something that I've heard some of my like remote training clients have done with their kids is whenever they typically will go work out, it's also their kids' PE time. So they'll have them do like a side workout in the garage with them, or, like maybe parents are looking at this and like, okay, I'm going to do day 1 on Monday. Cool. So you're going to do day 1. And while you're doing day 1, your kid's going to do a 10-minute workout for 10 minutes on a timer, to where they can do 3 sets of a pattern and an exercise, right? And have them just simply do it while they're there with you. And that could be a cool opportunity for you guys to share time together. But the other thing would be like if they're getting indoctrinated into this crazy world that is, fitness and health. All right, so I'll give you guys an opportunity to answer some questions. If I can help you guys in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. All of my contact information is right there for you guys. If you want to look at our gyms and see if I'm, real or not, all of our information is right there for you guys. Anytime you want to reach out, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. I know it's hard to get everything out and deliver everything in a 60-minute presentation, or in this case, a 75-minute presentation. But I appreciate you guys bearing with me. If I lost some of you and you got kind of googly-eyed with some of the science stuff, I promise you I try to stay as basic as possible, but also trying to make sure that I gave, real actionable principle-based information. I'm a very science and evidence-based coach. I'm not a fan of, methods. One of my favorite quotes that I tell both my teams and coaches that I mentor is to always remember that methods are many, principles are few. Methods always die, but principles never do. So remembering that all of the different exercise programs, whether it's for kids or adults, or, the speed program for your son who's, going to play youth sports that I would fall guilty of. The methods are cool, but the principles are the things that will ring true forever. And what you guys learned in this slide deck today is 100% principle based. So I really hope and truly hope that this helped you guys and gave you just some insights. If you had one or two epiphanies during that, then I have done my job today, and that makes me happy and fulfilled. So thank you guys for your time, and I'm more than welcome to. I'm welcoming you to ask questions. I would love to answer any that are there.
And we did have one come in.
Yep.
It was about, I think, because we were talking about your family doing dinner and the good and bad stuff. And so this question was, how important is it to have that at dinner? To have dinner be a sit down as a family? Could you have maybe breakfast be your sit down meal instead of dinner? So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good point. So I'll explain to you, number one, why we even do that. And then maybe it could be something cool for you guys to approach it too. So I took the thought probably like a year and a half ago to start viewing my family and my household differently, in the sense that some of you guys may think it's a little bit weird, but it's helped me to really frame things in a certain way. As I look at my household as a castle, I look at myself as the king, my wife is the queen, and my children are, in my case, all boys, are the princes of the house. And I always want to make sure it's not princesses, it's princes. They're the princes of the house. And I actually tell my oldest son, like, you're the acting king when I'm not there. But it's all based on this mindset that inside of our house, it is the castle and it is the sanctuary. And it is important for us to be connected in the castle, because when we leave the castle, we go to war with everything else, right? For me, that's war with the business place. That's war with people that oppose what I feel is goodness and wholeness and faithfulness, right? I leave my house, I go to battle for the day. Not physically, like I'm 6'5" and do martial arts, but I'm more likely to hug you than fight you. And it's a mindset that I have approached inside of my household. And this rang to where I really started to think about, like, okay, well, in the castle, where were some of the family dynamics built? Well, it's always around the dinner table, or for us, the dinner table, but that can be any table: breakfast, lunch, snack, randomly throughout the day. All those things work just fine. But that's something to just consider, that any time of the day that you can connect with your kids is great. It could be breakfast, it could be lunch, it could be dinner, it could be snack. But that frame of mind for me has put me in a place to where, like, I value that meal time with my children, because it's one of the few times, throughout the day where us as parents actually get to sit with our children and not be distracted and have things going on around us. So long story short, I talk too much, I apologize, but yes, breakfast, any sort of meal would be awesome. And you'll be amazed at some of the things that come out of your children when you guys play that game.
Yeah, Julianne, did you have a comment you said?
Yeah, I was just thinking through, like, some of the things that you were talking about in the beginning, and especially those basic life guidelines, I believe is what you call them. But the sleep one, and especially right now, it's super hard. I know, just as a newer parent, training my child to do that has been difficult. But I remember that being instilled, and that was like a big thing in our house growing up, that consistent time. And so even now to this day, I have friends that give me a hard time about, like, the time I go to bed and the time I wake up, but it really does set up the rest of those things for success on how I can eat and how I move and that kind of stuff. And I just noticed that when I have to, when that's interrupted at different times in life where that happens. And so, but I know that's one thing that teenagers really struggle with too. And they've had lots of studies about when school starts and that kind of stuff. So, but I just think about in this time how challenging it can be when you're kind of left to your own scheduling. But even now would be a great time to get that started, don't you think? Get that discipline.
100%.
Absolutely.
Now more than ever, I think and this is something that's really important for right now is I've talked often now at this point about like some of the struggles that I personally have during this COVID time. And it's oftentimes in periods of pressure when we turn away from the simplest things and make the biggest difference. And just simply going to bed at the same time and waking up and chewing your food and, you know, eating a vegetable every now and then, like that can go a long way in helping to handle some of the pressure, right? Especially for parents that are at home right now and they're, you know, children are around them in excess of time than what they're used to. That can be a big deal. And you can feel a lot of pressure. I feel the pressure. So I know that everybody else is feeling it just as much. And just remembering that the simple routines and patterns are what help me to handle that pressure per se.
Sure.
Yeah.
It just made me think of one more thing. Sorry, Phil.
You're good.
I know for me, like in this time, and one of the reasons I think that I tend to stay so busy and not spend as much time at home is that I tend to emotionally eat, like whether I'm like stressed or I get bored and stuff. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one, whether it's parents or teenagers. Do you have any like quick tips on, especially right now, that would be helpful to kind of, you know, that's maybe that baby step to help with that struggle?
So are we talking more like parents or children specific here?
I'd say both.
Mm-hmm. So I have a very strong belief around if you remember what you want and what your end target is,
Mm-hmm.
or what your target you're shooting for is, that goes a long way in helping with some of the cravings. A lot of times when people are missing they're falling off per se with their nutrition, or they're missing workouts or something like that, it typically means that there's a misalignment, meaning I thought I wanted to go here when really I wanted to go here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for parents and kids alike, getting clear with whether it's nutrition or training or the direction or the target, where are we going, right? Like, what do we want? And you'll be surprised at how many times you can ask somebody, like, what do you want? Like, what do you want for your body? What do you want for your nutrition? What do you want for your family dynamic? When you lay your head down at night and, you know, you think for a second, like, what was a successful day? Simply getting clear on that thing will help with those cravings. And remembering that cravings are a symptom typically of either, you know, a salt, you're malnourished on salt, or you're haven't had enough sugar that day, or you're dehydrated, or you're stressed. What happens when you are triggered by one of those things is there's a story that goes off in your head. Okay, I'm stressed right now, so I'm going to eat, right? Whereas like, I'm stressed right now and I'm feeling like I'm going to eat, but I want this thing instead. You know what I mean? Which goes with the direction piece. So misalignment, Jules, is always the way that I'll answer that question, because that reigns true 900% of the time. It's usually not a eating or food issue. It's most often a misalignment issue.
Okay.
Yeah. The trigger of food is the symptom of the underlying issue of like, what do I want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Really helpful. Thank you.
And that leads into something that some of our therapists and mental health professional friends have offered to help with. If you have kids in junior high or high school that are just really struggling right now and need somebody to talk to, they're offering free mini sessions to meet with those kids. And they clarified on our last phone call that it's a mini session initially, but they want to work with kids in our community who need this for free to help those kids for a while. So it's not just a one shot and those kids are done, they're going to drop them, but they're willing to help them overcome some of those emotional things, the depression, the anxiety, those different things that they're dealing with right now as school and whatnot's been canceled. So there's information on the screen for you to click to go to that website and get information on how you can get in touch with them and set up those appointments to help your kids. And I do want to say thank you to Cody and Julianne for being here. Great information for parents and for our community. So we appreciate it. And thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Have a great night.
Have a great night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.